The year was 1922. In the quiet surroundings of Somerset County, New Jersey, the daily rhythm of life was suddenly and violently interrupted. What began as a typical September morning would soon unravel into one of the most sensational murder investigations in American history. This is the true story of the Hall Mills murder case. Edward Wheeler Hall was a respected Episcopal priest serving at St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church in New Brunswick, New Jersey. He was born in 1881 and raised in Brooklyn, New York. After receiving his theological degree in Manhattan, Hall committed himself to ministry, eventually settling in New Brunswick with his wife, Frances Noel Stevens. Frances, born in 1874, came from one of New Brunswick's most prominent families. The Stevens, Carpenters, and Nielsen's were names deeply tied to the city's social and economic foundations. Her marriage to Hall in 1911 appeared to be a union of spiritual service and social stature. But underneath the surface, Edward Hall's attentions were not solely reserved for his wife. Eleanor Reinhardt Mills, born in 1888, was a member of Hall's church choir. She lived nearby at 49 Carmen Street with her husband, James E. Mills, the church's sexton and a janitor at Lord Sterling Elementary School. Eleanor and James had 2 children, Charlotte and Daniel. Despite her outwardly simple life, Eleanor longed for something more. Her feelings for Reverend Hall were no secret to those close to her, and the two had been engaged in an ongoing affair. On the morning of September 16, 1922, a shocking discovery was made near a secluded farm in Somerset County. The bodies of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills were found lying side by side in a field, just below a crab apple tree. Their position was unnatural, carefully arranged. Both victims were on their backs, their feet pointed toward the tree. A man's hat covered Hall's face, and a stack of torn-up love letters had been placed between the bodies. Edward Hall had been shot once in the head. The bullet entered above his right ear and exited from the back of his neck. Eleanor's death was far more violent. She had been shot 3 times, once beneath the right eye, once over the right temple, and once above the right ear. But the most gruesome detail was her throat, which had been slit post-mortem. Maggots had already settled into the wound, indicating the killings had occurred at least a day earlier. Both victims showed signs of bruising. Eleanor had a cut on her lip, a bruise on her arm, and her left hand was arranged to touch Hall's thigh. She wore a blue dress with red polka dots, black silk stockings, and brown shoes. Her velvet hat lay nearby, and a silk scarf was wrapped around her neck. Edward Hall, lying beside her, had his right arm placed to touch her neck. His eyeglasses were still in place, and abrasions were noted on his fingers. A wound was found on the calf of his right leg, approximately 5 inches below the kneecap. His gold watch was missing, though coins remained in his pocket. The calling card at his feet reads simply, Reverend E. W. Hall. The field where the bodies were found sat dangerously close to the jurisdictional border between Middlesex and Somerset counties. Police from New Brunswick, located in Middlesex, were the first to arrive. But the actual crime scene was just across the border in Franklin Township, under the jurisdiction of Somerset County. The confusion over jurisdiction created a delay. During that time, curious onlookers descended upon the scene. Hundreds of townspeople trampled the grass. Some picked up items as souvenirs. The calling card that had been placed near Hall's body was passed from hand to hand. A critical piece of evidence contaminated within minutes. Law enforcement lost valuable time, and the crime scene was hopelessly compromised before a proper investigation could begin. Within days, attention turned toward the people closest to the victims. There were no signs of robbery. The act had been deliberate, personal. The staged bodies, the torn letters, the intimacy of the wounds, all pointed to a crime of passion. Suspicion fell on Frances Hall, Edward's wife, and members of her family. Frances had both motive and means. She came from a wealthy, well-connected lineage and had 2 brothers, Henry Hugill Stevens and William Carpenter Stevens, both of whom were known to be close to her. A cousin, Henry de la Bruyere Carpenter, was also connected. The first investigation, led by Joseph E. Stricker, resulted in no formal indictments. but the public's appetite for answers was growing. In the months that followed, newspapers across the country became obsessed with the Hall Mills case. The New York Daily Mirror and others published stories nearly daily. Reporters swarmed New Brunswick. Public curiosity surged, fed by headlines of infidelity, privilege, and violent betrayal. It wasn't until 1926, 4 years later, that the case returned to the courtroom, fueled by sensational media coverage and new statements, including those from individuals linked to Francis Hall's household. Governor A. Harry Moore ordered a second investigation. This time, the outcome was different. Francis Hall, her brothers Henry and Willie, and cousin Henry Carpenter were charged. But before trial, Carpenter successfully petitioned to be tried separately. In the end, he was never prosecuted. On November 3, 1926, the Hall Mills murder trial officially began at the Somerset County Courthouse in Somerville. It lasted approximately 30 days and was attended by press, spectators, and journalists from across the nation. The courtroom was filled each day. The accused Francis, Henry, and Willie sat under the intense scrutiny of a fascinated public. The state's case was led by prosecutor Alexander Simpson. He was tasked with proving that Francis had orchestrated the murder, aided by her brothers and cousin. Defense attorneys included Robert H. McCarter, a former New Jersey Attorney General, and Timothy N. Pfeiffer. Joseph A. Farrow, a respected fingerprint expert, was called to testify. Raymond C. Stryker served as jury foreman. The most controversial witness was Jane Gibson, a local pig farmer whose property bordered the crime scene. The press dubbed her the Pig Woman. Jane Gibson lived in a converted barn near de Russey's Lane. On the night of the murder, she claimed she heard her dog barking around 9 p.m. Looking outside, she saw a man standing in her cornfield. Riding her mule toward Easton Avenue, she approached silently. She saw 4 people near a crab apple tree. She claimed she heard gunshots. A figure collapsed. A woman's voice cried out, "Don't!" 3 times. More shots followed. A second figure fell. She rode back toward her home. Then, she said, she heard a name called out, "Henry." Her testimony, delivered from a hospital bed brought into the courtroom, was challenged by the defense. They portrayed her as mentally unstable, uneducated, and untrustworthy. Her statements had changed slightly in each telling, to police, to newspapers, and now to the court. But despite the inconsistencies, she remained the prosecution's most compelling witness. After weeks of testimony and cross-examination, the jury returned its decision. Francis Noel Stevens Hall, Henry Hugill Stevens, and William Willie Carpenter Stevens were acquitted of all charges. No one was ever convicted in connection to the murders of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. The Hall Mills case remains officially unsolved. Despite national attention, multiple suspects, and a sensational trial, no one was ever convicted of the murders of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. The key witnesses were discredited, the crime scene was tainted, and the evidence, once mishandled, never recovered its integrity. Nearly a century has passed since the murders shocked New Jersey and the nation. What remains are unanswered questions, broken lives, and a mystery forever sealed in history. Was it a crime of passion? A family's desperate attempt to protect reputation? Or something more calculated? We may never know the full truth behind the murders beneath the crabapple tree.